Blog Talk Radio.
Warning, the following program may include profane language, controversial viewpoints, and perspectives on the true nature of reality so far removed from the status quo, they'll make your head spin like a top. Young children, corporate executives, and religious fundamentalists should turn away now.
Good evening, planet Earth, and welcome to a very, very special episode of Extraordinary Year, the online show about 2012 for everyday people like you. My name is Tim Bravo, and I want to extend my gratitude to you guys for listening in tonight. T-minus 162 days until December 21st, 2012. Remember, if you like the show, go like our Facebook page, facebook.com/extraordinaryyear. You'll find lots of links for everything we talk about on the shows. Plus, you can connect with like-minded people and stay on top of 2012 news and UFO sightings. A special night for you guys tonight. Our guests tonight, Andy Basiago, Bernard Mendez, and Laura Eisenhower. They all have a story to share with the world. It's a story of a reality so far removed from the status quo version you know, to speak of it publicly is bound to meet ridicule, maybe even death. Yet these brave folks have risked their reputations, their livelihoods, and maybe even their lives to bring it to you. It's a reality that's been purposely hidden from you, a reality you owe it to yourself and our civilization to consider and examine. Andy Basiago is currently a lawyer in Washington State. He'll tell you, though, that his past includes a childhood spent time traveling with his father, and a later period spent teleporting to Mars. Bernard Mendez served as a special assistant to President Richard M. Nixon. He also investigated in that capacity the Mars Trump Room program for the Nixon administration back in the 80s. Laura Eisenhower is the great-granddaughter of President Dwight Eisenhower. She was recruited by the secret space program in 2006, specifically to live on a colony we have on Mars. I wanted to do a panel discussion just because these guys have so much to say on these secrets individually. I wanted to get them together in a group to agree, disagree, bounce off one another in real time. So, Andy, Bernie, Laura, thanks for taking the time to have this discussion and share your experiences with us tonight.
Thank you for having me and us.
Now, I've got a ton of questions to ask you guys, so I'm going to try to keep the discussion on track to get through as much as possible. That said, I want you guys to speak freely, jump in on anyone else's point with a similar experience or contrary point, whatever. But I want to kind of get us started early here, kind of get things going. A lot of what you kind of corroborate on, specifically Andy and Bernie, it's all centered around one particular class. And one of the most prominent things about this story, I'm going to let you kind of get into it in a second, are the class participants. We're talking about an array of names that is shocking to anyone. Barack Obama being the primary, and it was led by renowned military remote viewer Major Ed Dames, the current head of DARPA, Regina Dugan. I heard something about a Google executive, astronaut Willie McCool. Is this all true, you guys?
Yes.
Yeah, Tim, actually, what happened was I had been describing publicly my experiences in DARPA's Project Pegasus, which was the classified defense-related research and development program of the early 1970s, involving primarily CIA personnel and employees of the Ralph M. Parsons Company in developing different time travel technologies in the early 70s. And it was during my public disclosure campaign that, much to my astonishment and delight, while I was actively pursuing leads for the early 70s, many of them with elderly participants, obviously because it was 40 years ago and I was a child, and many of the personnel were mid-career professionals, that I stumbled upon the fact that a whole area of activity that had taken place 10 years later in the early 80s had been blocked from my conscious mind. And I ended up encountering two of the other participants, namely William Brett Stillings and Bernard Mendez, Brett being one of the teenagers who was enrolled, and then Bernie being somebody that we knew in our training and also operationally when we were jumping. And we've corroborated now as 3 whistleblowers regarding the jump room program, that among the 10 teenagers who were trained under Major Ed Dames in a summer seminar held at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, right on the apron of Mount Shasta, were President Barack Obama, Regina Dugan, who when we first came forward publicly was serving as the director of DARPA. She's now made a career change and is an executive at Google. And then Brett and I, and also one of our brave NASA astronauts who sadly lost his life in the Columbia disaster as the pilot of the Space Shuttle Columbia, namely William McCool. So we've got 5 of the young people that were trained in that 3-week seminar identified, and as whistleblowers, we're in agreement that Major Dames was the instructor, despite the denial that he made on Coast to Coast AM in November of last year, that the young man named Barry Satoro was somebody we were trained with and went on jumps with, and he currently is serving as president under the name that he later chose, that of Barack Obama. And we're in agreement that the sole female among those 10 teenagers was Regina Dugan. And so I just like to surrender the microphone, but that kind of describes the point of confluence in the life of Brett and I where we met Bernie. Even when Brett and I were doing radio shows, we had talked privately about who that man was over on our left side of the classroom. There was somebody who was about 8 years older than I. We now know that I'm 50 and Bernie's 58, so the age that we remembered, the age difference corresponds. We remembered Bernie based on his appearance, the uniform that he was sometimes wearing to class. So something really astonishing has happened in the Truth Movement, which is that 3 participants from a secret defense technical project where a technology was used that was truly revolutionary, that was clearly a time travel technology, have met up, and we are sharing our story with the public.
And it's amazing. And I want to get to the technology in a bit. Well, first of all, Bernie, so you kind of jump in on this and give us your, how you remember this class that Andy was in.
When I first met Andrew, I was jumping in the East Coast. I didn't know it was the West Coast. And then in the East Coast room, there were airborne people I was with, and then after I jumped in the West Coast, I went back to the East Coast with some recon teams, and then I went back to the West Coast. So I was going between the East Coast and the West Coast. And my specific charge when I first met Andy, and I didn't even really know where I was when I first met Andy, I was supposed to arrive about 9-10 o'clock that day that we met. I had to stop over in Ohio because I had to ask Tom about some issues that were being brought up that I had to look into concerning, we'll just call it like a very large control board, very large switchgear area, electrical mainly, that there was some sort of power drain issue. So I stopped by, and then it took a while to find Tom. He was a little busy. I was strictly told to talk to him. He knew who I was. He knew my family. They go back quite a ways. And I started talking to him. I says, Tom, what's been going on? I says, he has some problems. There's a power loss someplace. Is there anything you need? He said, yeah, well, he needed a lot of spare parts. And I told him I'll take care of that. I said, well, what's this power drain about? He said, I double-checked everything here. I'm fine here. It's further down the line someplace. But I need a lot of people to check everything. And then when we're done there, I went to California. Now it's late in the afternoon. I've been awake for about 20 or 30, 34 hours, or 36 hours. So I got there late in the afternoon, and that's when I met Andy, Regina, and my specific charge there was to ask a series of questions to my escort, Major Dames. And I began talking. First I met with Major Dames. He showed me around a little bit. We were talking. We were standing out in the hallway talking, and I think Andrew was inside and a few other people, and then I was introduced to them, and then we sat in the classroom and we started discussing all this. And James was asking me, what I knew, what the problems were. I told him, I said, I have a list of questions for you about personnel, about training, what you need, because the appropriations bill was coming up. There were a lot of questions that he asked. And then,
so the money for this stuff would come out of appropriations bills?
Well, this is all government financed, mainly. There was a lot of private corporations too involved. Andrew can tell you more about that.
So was it on paper somewhere?
I was told never to write anything down, never to take any notes, to report directly back to the administration, where it be debriefed, usually with a senior officer or a senior enlisted personnel who would make reports. And then I would probably meet, with the assistant, another assistant, and then go over the details.
Okay.
But that was all. That was all.
Tim, the financing on these programs was so tendentious and really so outside the normal government function that Brett and I have compared notes about the fact that our fathers had fronted the money to drive us from Southern California to Shasta for the training program with no guarantee of being reimbursed. Now, usually this funding, if it was government funding, that the intelligence community was frequently hiding this kind of operational funding in the agriculture budget. I don't know if that's very well known publicly. Frequently, you may recall actually from the Iran-Contra scandal, that private funding was being used because that was an attempt by factions of the intelligence community and at the program level to evade congressional oversight. So, for example, when I was serving on Project Pegasus as a child, it was under the aegis of DARPA, but a lot of the funding was coming from the Colgate-Palmolive dynasty. In fact, Sterling Colgate was one of the time travel technologists on the project.
Really?
So we don't know whether a private source was used to fund the jump room program 10 years later in the early 80s, but it certainly could have been. One or more private financial sources could have been relied upon.
Huh. That's interesting.
The appropriations bill was for $1 trillion. So there were a lot of questions being asked by the administration or the Senate subcommittee, who I spoke with from time to time, and had questions.
Well, I want to get back to the class here, guys. Well, I'm sorry. I wanted to jump back to the class because you guys have talked about Brett Stillings, and I know he was in that same class with you. There are also other whistleblowers, Michael Relf and Arthur Newman. Were they part of the same class?
No. In fact, Michael Relf's account indicates that the jump room program may have begun in 1976. Arthur Neumann, who is the Henry Deacon informant for Project Camelot, who I've communicated with via encrypted email. Arthur was involved very recently going up to Mars via jump room for the National Security Agency. So our experiences came after Michael's, but long before Arthur's. But
How recently?
You raised a good point, which is that we now have what? In addition to Laura confirming the existence of the secret Mars colony, which I imagine you want to speak with her in this program, we now have 5 individuals who were up on Mars. We have 4 who went in the late 70s, early 80s, and then we have a recent account from Arthur Neumann. So we've got 5 whistleblowers now who confirm the jump room to Mars, and I think our account is only strengthened by Laura's experiences that indicate that a secret colony on Mars has been receiving people from at least the middle 2010s, the 2005 and later period.
And Laura, your account is from 2006, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you can speak to the fact that there's definitely something there. Now, did you use or were you shown the technology that they're currently using?
No, I was not, but it was mentioned in emails to me. Looking Glass Technologies and something called the Orion's Cube were mentioned, but I never saw them. A few other
What about
things.
what about actually getting to Mars? Because aren't those like time travel or time looking devices?
Right. Yeah, they are. The way we were going to go to Mars, they said we're via something called ARC, spelled A-R-C. And they seem to be some sort of anti-gravity vessel or ship. And the plan was not to teleport. And I don't know the reason, but I'm starting to get some information that I don't know is true that might explain this, but I'm not ready to speak about it yet because I'm not sure if it's legitimate information. But there might be a reason that we weren't teleporting and we were going to actually take crafts or arcs.
I wonder if that's an acronym. I was just thinking when Laura was addressing the arcs, maybe that was anti-something chamber. And if you talk about Orion's Cube, the real mystery of our jump room experiences is where the time travel technology that was used came from. Bernie thinks it may have been provided to the U.S. government by a species of gray extraterrestrial, and then how it was doing what it was doing. Essentially, we were standing in an elevator, the East Coast one being in New York City or near New York City, and the West Coast one being at a building in El Segundo, California, near the Los Angeles airport, that was then owned and operated by Hughes Aircraft. And the mystery is how it was morphing from a cylinder, from a chamber or elevator-like room namely the elevator in the building at 999 North Sepulveda in the case of El Segundo, and then twisting into a cylinder with us in it, and then righting itself, and the door would open, and then we would be elsewhere. So I'm just throwing it out there that maybe ARC was actually an acronym for anti-something chamber, because we were truly in a chamber, and it was the special functioning of that elevator that repositioned us in time space. So we're calling it teleportation, but I'm not even sure that it was teleportation of the kind that we began doing in the late 60s, early 70s, based on Tesla's technology. It may have been another time travel technology altogether, but it wasn't a seeing device. We were going there. It was a transport, not a chronovisor. So it had more in common with the two.
I think what Laura was involved in was the later program and the more advanced stages of it when they upgraded everything, and she was in a different vehicle altogether.
Do you know Bernie? Do you know the time period that this supposed upgrade took place?
There were apparently a lot of jump rooms. I've been to the East Coast and the West Coast. I can't disclose the locations on the East Coast. There were 2 locations on the East Coast, and then 3 locations. I found about the 3rd location after I left the West Coast, and long after the Nixon administration. And I heard about ARC, and I wasn't involved directly in ARC because I heard there was a mishap there. But the Navy picked me up after that.
Okay. So I know you guys have mentioned that Ed Dames called into the Coast to Coast show while you were on and refuted that he led this class. Now, being that he is who he is, well, Andy, you had a memory block of this class for years, right?
Correct. Yeah, we were clearly.
Do you suppose that he got one?
It's possible. In fact, the only incident that occurred that indicated that none of the participants, or maybe one of the participants, had not been subject to brainwashing, was a meeting that Courtney Hunt of the CIA facilitated between myself and Regina Dugan a year after our training in the summer of 1981, where I didn't remember who she was from the training class the previous summer. And she joked to Courtney as she was leaving that meeting, you've got this poor boy brainwashed. Now, if you look at the other participants, we have no evidence that Barack Obama and Regina were not subject to the same attempts to brainwash them after our training and before our jump room experiences that Brett and I agree took place. I didn't recover my memories regarding the jump room program. I had always remembered my childhood experiences in Pegasus because I successfully resisted the brainwashing and brought the information forward in my mind over time. But I acknowledge that my memories of the jump room program were successfully blocked by the government. I don't think it's fair to say that we were mind controlled because we weren't placed under entrainment. We were actually trained to be very decisive and volitional in the field. They weren't trying to direct our behavior. They were trying to encourage us to do as much exploring and spontaneous interaction with the environment as possible so we could perceive what it consisted of and accurately report back what we'd experienced. We were always debriefed on after returning to Earth via jump room. But what's curious here is I think the point you're raising, which is when Major Dames called into Coast, he began to purport a set of alternate explanations, like the notion that our memories were the result of some sort of set of experiences that had taken place in a parallel reality. He became increasingly agitated and angry at me as I think I successfully refuted his denial. I mean, I think that was an argument that he started, but that I won, so to speak.
Huh.
And if you look back, it's perfectly consistent with the notion that maybe in turn he had been brainwashed to forget, because the three of us are now in agreement that it was Ed Dames. It was either Ed Dames or somebody who looked exactly like him who was using his name. I mean, we socialized with him. We had cake parties for 3 weeks that frequently he would come by and kind of put in an appearance at the party. Barack Obama was identified in the sense that his mother was auditing the class, as my late father and Brett's late father were. And they were openly speaking about Barack Obama's presidency and also the prospect that I might reach the presidency at some point in front of us. So it wasn't another Barry Soetoro, it was the president. But yes, we're in complete agreement, and we resolutely stand by our account and the fact that it included the president as one of the teenagers enrolled and Ed Dames as our instructor. And in fact, we publicly lauded his capabilities as an instructor. We credit him with keeping us alive on the surface of where we were going, whether it was Mars or some other planetary domain. He was a great instructor, and we look back with admiration regarding his involvement. But we are in absolute agreement that it was Ed. And so maybe, if the young people involved were brainwashed, we didn't remember what happened, perhaps the instructor was at some time. I mean, these are pretty sophisticated intelligence operations, at the end of the day. So it's certainly a possibility.
And so, same thing with Barack. I know that the White House has denied his involvement in this. Big surprise. But it is completely possible that he might have heard this and think it's crazy because he doesn't remember either.
Right, but then again, when was the last time that the president used the spokesman for the National Security Council to knock down a conspiracy theory or an urban legend? I mean, that was pretty singular that they would show such regard for our factual account.
Well, that's because yours has some teeth.
Right, and I think it was because they investigated it and they realized it was a true story, and it implicated the president in a secret defense project as a young man. But that's something that really kind of surprises me that they would knock it down, because he has everything to gain in terms of his presidential stature and his chances of being reelected by simply saying, yes, when I was 19 years old, I did something kind of neat for the government. I mean, President Obama is so facile as a communicator. I don't see why they didn't just have him do that, hold a press conference and say, yeah, I went up in these strange contraptions and I did some dangerous and heroic things for our security and for international security, and something? I'm proud of it. But
they would have to reveal the technology. They would have to reveal that they've hidden all this from us. They would have to go away and give us everything that they've held from us.
Correct. That's the impediment, is the culture of state secrecy that he's now operating under as president. But I think that I don't really see it I didn't see it as a threat to his reputation, his presidency, his chances of being reelected. I think it's something he should talk about, because this was one of the exploits that he was part of as a young man, and I think it's something that is a legitimate topic in U.S. presidential history, and I think we would all gain by the president standing by the pledge he made when he was running for president to lead an administration characterized by transparency, and simply come forward and do a press conference acknowledging the existence of this particular project and his involvement in it.
Well, old Barry said a lot of things on the campaign trail that didn't pan out after we elected him. But anyway, I'm not going to get into political stuff. I just wanted to ask you guys, do you have any indication that any of your other classmates have broken through the block? Have you heard from anybody else? Or I guess basically this is all you remember?
We have essentially the basic story. I mean, we've identified who in the class that we bonded with enough. It was kind of like living in the dorms with fellow college students or serving on jury duty. We got to know the people involved as friends and colleagues, but our training program and then our jumps were very episodic, so it's not like they became fast friends. I certainly was not in communication with Barack Obama or Regina Dugan after the jump program ended for me around 1983. I did have a couple of both project-related and just social encounters with Barack Obama. In fact, one time after he changed his name in the early 80s. But we didn't remain in communication as friends. Even Brett and I, who had been thrown together at the campground at Lake Siskiyou under the aegis of our fathers, being sort of same-age peers from Southern California. Brett was a few years younger. Brett and I didn't remain in communication. When he contacted me in early 2010, I hadn't spoken with him since 1983, 27 years earlier. So it was a real shocker. It was like somebody from your fifth grade class coming forward and reminding you about something non-ordinary that you had experienced together. So,
I was in fifth grade in 1983, so it'd be exactly like that.
Well, we hit it on the head there, but no, we're kind of in a consensus now about what we're able to remember in terms of, Dame's involvement, who was in the classroom, Bernie being there, with not only Ed Dames as his administrative escort, but with an armed guard who was in the nature of military escort protecting him. 5 of the 10 teenagers have been identified. We've identified the 3 parents in the room. Sometimes, in fact, Regina's mother was also present, but not for the whole course. We agree that William Cameron McCool, who went on to become a space shuttle astronaut in 1996, was present for about a week and then left the training program. Brett thinks he may have encountered him on the surface after jumping. And so we've got the subject material covered. We're in agreement about that, what we were taught during those 3 weeks, and the jump room experience. Brett reminded me, actually, that it wasn't a matter of us remaining stable and then the jump room twisting from a box into a cylinder, but it was really a mind-bending and gut-wrenching experience as we were twisting with it. So his description on one of our broadcasts was just spot on, and it really brought back those memories for Bernie and I. And then we're in agreement with different scenarios that occurred on the surface, because we weren't always going up together. Usually you went by yourself or with one other jumper. Several times we went up in waves of 2 jumpers at a time, where we would linger at the jump room facility for, let's say, 15 minutes for the next 2 people to come through. And so that produced the set of memories that Brett and I have of interacting with Barry on the surface as we knew him then, namely President Obama. So a lot of information has come forward. What we can still maybe prove, if we could get hold of the project files, would be who the other 5 young people were, and then really start to get the accounts of Barack Obama and Regina Dugan about what they remember. I think that's going to be invaluable.
Yeah. Bernie, speaking of your memory, did you have a memory block? Having served for, the president, I'm assuming that your memory was left intact so you could report back.
I didn't have much of a memory block. I did have some memory loss due to jumping, which was quite dangerous at the time. And I recall most of it. The problem is that I did not know it as a jump room. I knew it as a project. I've heard of Parson or the preacher or the Parson. Jump room was not known to me, that word, until after I met Andy, and then my escort, Major James, told me we call it the jump room. They referred to it as a jump room on the West Coast. On the East Coast, it wasn't called a jump room. Okay.
Now, there is another whistleblower on this whole technology. Alfred Weber posted something this week about a 1989 lecture and affidavit by Naval Intelligence Officer Milton William Cooper. Now, how did he know about this stuff?
I haven't studied Bill Cooper's claims in a long time. I think certainly at the time that he was alive and playing the role of truth advocate and whistleblower, he had kind of an edge to his personality. So I think people were always wondering whether he was for real or not. I think he impressed some people as a kook, but from the perspective of 2020 hindsight here, I think it's fair to say that Milton William Cooper has become somewhat of an American folk hero, because in retrospect, almost everything he revealed about extraterrestrial interaction with the U.S. government and some of the hidden cosmic secrets that have come forward more recently, the existence of time travel technology, the Mars program, and the presence of U.S. facilities on the surface of Mars, were entirely accurate, and presumably they were gained by a result of the fact that he was a briefing officer for the Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy. In fact, William Cooper told the story of the fact that the U.S. government was in possession of a documentary film of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, and I saw that film. And when I was describing my experience seeing that film, having the sort of the cosmic privilege to view that historical data, which I did at the Sandia facility in New Mexico in 1972 when I was a child on Project Pegasus, I had no awareness that part of Bill Cooper's disclosure efforts included that account. I thought he had just made a set of statements about Majestic 12 and the concealment of the subject of liaison between the U.S. government and different extraterrestrial factions, and everything that resulted from the retrieval of crashed ET craft and sort of that subject area. I wasn't aware that he had revealed aspects of the quantum access that the U.S. government has been engaged in since the late 60s and the advent of time travel. So I was actually quite surprised surprised by Alfred's article regarding Bill Cooper having presaged some of these topic areas, because I didn't know that his truth campaign went into some of these areas. But I think, in hindsight, he was spot on. And he may very well have lost his life in a shootout with some sheriffs in Arizona as a result of being an opponent of government secrecy and an advocate of truth and the people's right to know.
Huh. I guess I'm not a very good conspiracy theorist because I don't know his name until I just saw that from Alfred. So I think maybe I should do some better research in the future. So he's a bit of a folk hero, eh?
Well, I mean, he's not somebody that I would point to as a principal expert on, the last 60 years of interaction with extraterrestrials. But
it's pretty amazing corroboration.
Oh, yeah. And he made a number of very substantive allegations beginning in 1989 that have essentially predicted even current truth movement whistleblowing. So I don't think Milton William Cooper can be dismissed as an overwrought personality. I think that in retrospect, especially given the time that he was doing, serving this revelatory function in our society, his claims were very controversial, and I think he was putting his life at risk. And so I've had to reformulate my understanding of Bill Cooper, and I have much more respect for him now than I did even prior to Alfred's article, because I wasn't aware that he had actually pinpointed some of the data that has been retrieved via quantum access.
I think where the controversy comes here is that Cooper is a person I probably met who was involved in a lot of the mechanics on a day-to-day basis of the jumps and a lot of the technology of these jumps. And that as time went on, and in the beginning we didn't know where these jumps were going to. It was an unknown area, an unknown space, and that Cooper eventually figured out that there were other places that were being jumped from besides the East Coast and the West Coast, probably the Navy, and that he had determined through intelligence sources who these other jumpers were and their claims as to where the jump was going. At the time, I was jumping with Andrew. We did not know precisely where these locations were, and my job, after reporting back to the administration, was that they were formulating a plan using homing devices left over from the Apollo program to determine precisely where these locations were that we were jumping to. This was a very massive project. It was probably another major person here who I saw on YouTube. I'm pretty sure that's him. His name's Al Billick. I did meet with a person, and I didn't know his name. He didn't know my name. We sat down. We talked for about 2 hours. There were Navy personnel there. Cooper may have been there. I don't know. And my account, my report, matched his report point for point. But his report was like 15 or 20 years before mine. And we sat there and discussed all this.
And you say his name is Al Billick?
Al Billick, he's on YouTube. And it looks like him.
Okay.
And he was going...
I know from my discussion with Al Bielek, I had one in the 2005-2006 time frame, that Al Bielek talked about going to an engineering company to get a job, and the personnel there, the managers of the company, were shocked because he didn't know that he had worked there. So here we have this is the astonishing thing about where all this information is going in real time here. I had concluded, based on things I'd heard about Al, that he was basically a psychiatric case. I had been told that somebody had made a comment to him, somebody had raised the point of possible time travel adherence being mind-controlled mental patients, and Al had joked, and he had turned at a cocktail party, and somebody said, "Is that the case with you, Al?" And he had affirmed it on a level of humor. But and so I know his whole account of the Philadelphia experiment. I had faulted him in his account for conflating reincarnation with teleportation when he tells the story of the Cameron brothers and so forth. But here we have a situation now where before his death, actually it's several years before his death, Al had revealed to me that he knew he had been brainwashed after the fact because he had this missing or incomplete understanding of his own curriculum vitae, his own professional history, and found it out when he applied for a job as an engineer at that company. Now, Bernie comes forward, and he's somebody I remember not from the Pegasus days of the early 70s, but from the jump room days of the early 80s, And Bernie shares with me that he knows he was in one or more meetings with Al Bielek. So we've kind of squared the circle on Al Bielek and established that even though his own understanding, epistemologically, of his experiences in the U.S. time-space program and exactly what those activities entailed was incomplete or had been altered by post-hoc brainwashing, he nonetheless was what he said he was, which was an authentic experiencer. So something really powerful is going on here where different whistleblowers, existing whistleblowers like Al Bielek and newer figures on the scene like myself and William Stillings and Bernard Mendez are basically squaring the circle on the brainwashing that was done and establishing the historicity of each other's involvement.
So let's talk about the technology a little bit. I want to know, how was the other side of the Mars jump set up? How did they get it there?
Andrew, you want to take that, or do you want me to take it?
Well, I'll take it. Yeah. See, we're sharing what we know. Actually, let me grab this, Bernie. We're sharing what we know. One of the epistemological mysteries of the jump room experience, first of all, I don't remember anything in the training course that described where the technology came from. We did have one training seminar one afternoon where we were shown a mock-up of the jump room that was really just a grain elevator-like facility out in one of the neighborhoods in Wheat, not many blocks distant from the campus there. But they didn't go in at length as to, in fact, I don't remember them ever stating where the technology came from. So the enigma is, how could we have been jumping to a jump room facility on Mars if that was the way you got there? In other words, how did the jump room facility on Mars, or whatever planetary domain we were reaching, how did it get there before the first jumpers reached it? In fact, the larger issue is, what were the jump rooms doing? How could you have a physical box that would morph into a cylinder and then open up and deposit you elsewhere in time-space? What was it doing? We could be, glib about it and say it was being punched through a wormhole in time-space, but that really doesn't explain how it was essentially violating the basic laws of physics and how it was operating.
As we understand them, anyway.
Bottom line is, we don't know how it got there. Maybe it got there through conventional probes to Mars in the 50s and 60s that had been early 70s or 70s that had been concealed, or maybe there was either extraterrestrial liaison or interaction with the Martian humanoids that are related to us to actually establish the jump room infrastructure in consultation with people in our aerospace community. I can tell you this: I may have uncovered an explanation just by discussing this subject with one of my law clients here in the state of Washington, which is, she described how when she was working as a secretary for Howard Hughes at Hughes El Segundo headquarters, not the jump room facility on North Sepulveda, but the one deeper into El Segundo, that he had placed some wrapped aerospace, some packaged aerospace parts on her desk one day and said, "Rose, there are going to be two men appearing at your desk today. They're not from our planet. I want you to give them these parts." So from the account of this law client of mine, we can establish that Howard Robart Hughes himself was in extraterrestrial liaison. Hughes Aircraft was the owner and operator of the building that contained the West Coast jump room. Bernie knew Howard Hughes and interacted with him in intelligence activities related to the defense of the United States. So it may very well be that Mars or the planetary domain that we were reaching had the jump room facility established on it, so that human beings from Earth could get back and forth to that location with greater speed, but that there had been...
Is anybody having a hard time hearing him?
Laura, no, I'm hearing him okay.
Okay, continue. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so there may have been some prehistory here where the jump room facility had been established more laboriously because they had the ability to use the jump room technology to get back and forth from the location where they were sending us in the jump room facilities on Earth. But right now, it's basically a technical mystery that touches upon the background of our experiences.
May I interject here?
Please do.
I discussed this with Mr. Hughes and his technical people. In the beginning, the Navy ran the project, and I think the British had a version of this too. They were accessing a domain which they didn't know, and then jumping back. It would last maybe 2-3 minutes to access the domain, then jump right back. And then as time progressed and news people using his technical support teams came on board, the jump rooms cylinders got bigger until the size of an elevator, and the technical know-how got better with video cameras. Was working on the video end of it. There was no term optical physicist at that time, but eventually an optical physicist was a term that was being used, and news people were developing all this technology to bring back better video pitches, because a lot of the equipment didn't work during the jump. And when I was discussing, from time to time, Mr. Hughes would tell me, I want you to talk to my technical people and answer their questions. And what I was gathering, and I spoke to Mr. Hughes about this, I did not believe at some point that we were in control of these rooms. I believe that eventually the space aliens, who felt that we had accessed their domains and then eventually we would figure this out, were allowing us and guiding us to these domains. And that all these domains would be a domain that were familiar to us or that we could relate to. There were many places to jump to, but I believe that the places that we were being directed to were specifically guided by the aliens in collaboration with the technical people working alongside with the aliens to develop this technology so that we can go from where we were to these domains back and forth. Go ahead.
Okay, well, while I've got you, Bernie, I wanted to ask you, I know this whole thing kind of started centered around this Ohio control room issue that then was pushed on down the line. Was that power drain ever figured out? And specifically, do you know how the Ohio control room operated? I mean, how would it function in being connected with these other jump rooms? Why was it separate?
The Ohio area had a lot of electrical equipment, a lot of breakers, and a lot of other peculiar electrical equipment. I only went there once or twice, and we discussed this, that it was a power drain. And when I first met Andy, was when I came from Ohio. I was supposed to be at like 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I ended up late in the afternoon. And then the major said, we're not going to jump today. We have a power failure. So we went over to the barracks and didn't jump till early the next morning. And we had discussed this. This was a major issue. Where was this power drain? To the best of my knowledge at the time, right up until about the 1980s, it was never determined where this power drain was in that particular aspect of the jump room. And that's when there were more reports before I met Andrew about this power drain. And it was never determined precisely what it was, but from the other reports, I mean, I was with the administration, and then all the reports would be summarized, and then because the administration people had been doing this for many years, they would want certain points made, and other points they really wouldn't care, they really discarded, and then summaries would be made. But that was one of the major topics. Where was this power drain? What was this about? It was never determined as far as around 1980, but by that time, the jump rooms had been upgraded and moved around, and then there was a different type of jump room altogether, and that's what Laura was getting involved in, the Govt project and the Govt technology, which had then the whole power drain was eliminated. We actually bypassed this whole mechanism that was there when I was at the West Coast jump room.
With the mechanism that you and Andy used, how long did a jump to Mars take? Was it 30 seconds? Well,
actually, that changed from time to time because we didn't know where we were going or where we were jumping to. So the jumps would last. We couldn't tell how long the jumps in the beginning were lasting. So from the time you left point A to you ended at point B, we didn't know what the time lag was because I tried using a watch. It didn't work. And it was a very expensive watch. And then you would land, the door would open, we get out, and then we can calculate the time. And then we usually spend about 30 seconds because the fear of hypoxia is a low oxygen environment. we'd make the recon, make our observances, and then jump back. So the actual time at the location would be, when I first started before the West Coast, it would be like a few minutes, then went up to 3 minutes, 14 minutes, 17 minutes, 28 minutes, actual time on ground, and then you jump back. But we could never determine, at least when I was jumping, how much time you were between point A and point B, and then how much time you actually physically spent at that location before you jump back. But that was later rectified. So we're looking at a total jumping time in the beginning of about 32 minutes. That's what I was told. But I didn't have a watch on me. I didn't see a clock in the building. And
yeah, Tim, if I might jump in here, this is also something that Brett and I have compared notes on. I think the way to conceptualize it is this way. We enter the jump room. We know that through the intercom that the jump has begun. The lights at the top and the bottom, there were panels on the top edge and the bottom edge of the jump room. Just like you might have in a conventional elevator, just to indicate what floor, that you're going past floors. So there would be blinking lights that would indicate to us that the jump had begun. And what seemed like 5 minutes into the jump room would begin morphing from a box-like form into a cylinder. And as I say, I had initially simplified this because I had kind of blocked how our minds would then be turned kind of into a pretzel as we twisted with the jump room. And then it untwisted. It was my perception that during that twisting phase, when the jump room had morphed from a box into a cylinder, that lasted about 10 minutes. Then it would begin untwisting, and there'd be about 5 minutes of normalcy before the door opened and we were elsewhere. Now, these jump room facilities were kind of like the infrastructure you'd have around an elevator in a mining site, where the jump room elevator would arrive one or several floors underground. And then we would walk out the door and then upstairs to get out of the jump room, the lower chambers of the jump room facility up to the surface. So when Bernie states that somebody had estimated it was 32 minutes, that's entirely consistent with my sense of time, because the first and the third segments of that, where the jump room hadn't begun twisting yet or had already righted itself into a box, could have very well been 10 minutes. But it seemed like the time when we were under the mind-bending and nauseating effects of the distortion of the shape of the box itself was about 10 minutes. So it wasn't an instantaneous experience like when we were jumping through the Tesla teleporters at Curtis Wright and getting to Santa Fe in a couple seconds when I was a kid on Pegasus. It was much more of a physically and psychologically deracinating type of event where you kind of had to endure the disturbing sensations and perceptions of the twisting of the jump room and just kind of space out and not try to freak out at how weird it was, how much it distorted ordinary perception and sensation, and then feel more comfortable that you were elsewhere. So it was about 20 to 30 minutes, I would say, and it was pretty stressful because we were also, as Brady just mentioned, we were also worrying about not breathing, not hyperventilating, so that we would use up too much of the air inside the jump room and might asphyxiate. So that was part of our training.
I
So
was
they
told
couldn't send oxygen tanks with you guys?
the tanks would explode, or what they call morphing. You couldn't, nothing worked. It was very dangerous. These jumps were very dangerous in the beginning when we were jumping, and we couldn't. Eventually, we started taking equipment, but most of the equipment failed. The flashlights and other electrical equipment completely failed. And then eventually, when Laura was jumping, they overcame this problem, and that was a completely different system that she was using.
Laura, did you actually jump?
Bernie, but I think that what I recall is that
I did not
Courtney
jump.
Hunt, Courtney Hunt had trained me at Cal State Northridge on a very rudimentary respiration tank that would be in front of you, not on your back like scuba, but just this unilinear tank that you would pump a little bit. And I was provided that for my first jump in July of '81, and I was met by 3 of our project people on the surface, not Bernie or Brett or anybody I'd been trained with, but earlier jumpers. And they were not using respiration equipment. So I asked them if I could take mine off, and I did, and I could breathe successfully on the surface. So certainly by the time I first jumped in July of '81, we were bringing equipment through the jump room, that kind of equipment. But they
so
were very
is it something that they could actually acclimate to the surface atmosphere?
Well, I don't think we were acclimating to it, but there was enough oxygen to survive on the surface. I mean, a couple times when I spent several hours on the surface, including one jump with Courtney Hunt and William Stillings, my thigh muscles and calf muscles were just screaming with pain from hypoxia. So it was an atmosphere that was deficient in oxygen, but it was an atmosphere that had enough oxygen for human life to be sustained even during fairly vigorous exercise, hiking around a desert landscape. But then,
running from predators?
By images.
Running from predators?
Well, I didn't run from any predators. I was present while 2 of our personnel were eaten by predators. But I was just going to say that the notion that Mars oxygen is breathable is supported by NASA's own data, because we now have color-corrected images showing the blue sky at Mars. So if it was in fact Mars that we were visiting, we now have the rover data corroborating the claim of Brett and I, for example, and Bernie, as he just stated it, that we could breathe unassisted on the surface. Because oxygen is a clear gas, it refracts blue and creates blue skies.
Let me interject. We knew later that the environments some of these environments, we breathe in a 19 to 21% oxygen environment here on Earth. Some of these areas had oxygen levels of like 8 or 9%, 3 or 4%, somewhere in there. So we had to be trained to withstand the effects of hypoxia, and you're not freaked out. But this time, as time went on, we got more and more technologically advanced that we could bring some oxygen with us. And we were able to determine what the oxygen level was where we were jumping to. And then we were able to put more oxygen in the jump rooms somehow. I don't know how they were doing it. I thought I saw cylinders in the jump room once. They were very peculiar looking cylinders. So these jumps are very dangerous. In the beginning, it was a very low oxygen environment. You had to be trained to deal with a low oxygen environment.
Now, Laura, let me ask you, in the descriptions of the ARC technology, did they mention how long that technology was taking to get to the surface of Mars?
Nope. I mean, I can review some old emails, but no, they didn't really say. But they said we were going to go beyond Mars. And the thing is, it seemed like it was all about taking over something, way more than just Mars. So it seemed, besides just being, just at the colony, that they were planning on going much further. I don't know if they wanted to take me with them there, but yeah, I don't know though how long the travel time was, or what a whole lot about the technologies. I wasn't given those kind of details.
Did they indicate to any of you guys any specifics on where, other than Mars and I know the Moon, we have bases now?
I didn't get that information, just that we would get further than Mars. Actually, maybe while we speak, I can look up one of these emails and see exactly what it says.
Cool. Andy,
yeah,
how about...
I wasn't given a lot of information. Everything was done through my partner, and he was only allowed to tell me so much, and I wasn't allowed to know a lot because it was all very secret, and he was really encouraged to not say certain things. And after I had a dream that I was being taken up and I had a choice, he started to leak information because he started to realize that I was, becoming aware of what was really going on without needing them to verify it. I got a little bit ahead of them, which they didn't expect. So.
Now, you were able to get away. Were you able to get away without a memory block? Where they didn't have an opportunity to kind of bury it?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, how did you get out of that whole situation? Was it kind of a run for your life type of thing, or how did that happen?
Well, I was living with him, and basically he had a handler and would get phone calls and disappear for days and on missions. And about 4 or 5 months into the relationship, he said that he was sent to take me to Mars, that we didn't meet in the way that I thought we met, which was, there was an attraction and we formed a relationship. He told me later on that they had specifically sent him, and then it was later leaked to me that something about the Looking Glass Technologies located us in a past life and knew that we had a natural affinity, because, you can't just fall for somebody unless there's something already there. So, we definitely had a karmic connection, but he would shift all the time, his personality, and actually become robotic. But for me to get away, yeah?
You mean in a robotic manner, not as an actual robot?
No. He would act robotic.
Okay.
His physical form stayed the same, but it was, what we see with mind control and trauma-based programming that is dealing with alters and multiple personality disorders, because they're traumatized to that level until that happens. And so when I was with him, I didn't know all this information. I wasn't very schooled in conspiracy. Observing him, because I was like, this is really odd. This is really odd. I had one red flag after another, and then I started to pay attention to the names that he was talking about and the people he was meeting with, and then I was, researching these names, and I wasn't really going to be hit. Most of these names were associated with careers like physics and, other things, and it took about 2 weeks to, find an association with those particular names and technologies like HARP and psychotronic weaponry, artificial telepathy, and, things like that. So for me to get away, it was not easy. I wasn't actually in the program. I was just in the relationship, so I had to get away from the relationship. And basically, after I had that dream that really gave me a heads up, I later had a dream that I was being attacked by robots, and they were in the form of children's toys. And I thought, maybe the symbolism had to do with, everything appears, innocent and protective towards me, but later on these toys were activated, and in this dream they tried to kill me and shooting stuff at me. And then I ran out of the house, and I was handed a whistle by this person at a vendor, on this path. And he said, if you play this whistle, just play your song. And so I played the whistle, and I looked up on the hill, and all these robots were exploding, and they were being destroyed. So I looked at this as a clue that maybe if I start to speak about this, if I start to expose this might protect me and get me out of it.
Oh, my God. That is great.
My dream saved my life. The first dream was that I was being taken up by chains into this ship, and they were taking me to Mars, and that they were going to control me. And the voice from the sky said, you have a choice. You can stay on Earth and do your mission, or you can go with them, and they'll control you. And I made my choice, and I landed in the water. I fell out of the ship, dragged me up by the ocean, and dragged me up by chains. And then when I made the choice, I fell out of the ship, splashed into the water. It was a very lucid dream. I could actually feel the water. And then all of a sudden, planets aligned. This incredible planetary alignment happened, and the sky filled up.
Sounds like something fell over.
That's my chair.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and so, this was before I really had any details at all. I mean, that gave me a major, major heads up, and then the dream about blowing the whistle, and I hadn't even really thought of the term whistleblower at all. I hadn't met Andy, and I didn't know Project Camelot. I didn't know any of this. So in 2006 was the same year Project Camelot started, which was the year I got out of this recruitment. So those two dreams actually really saved my life. And then after I had the dream about blowing the whistle, I spoke on the phone with my friend, and I was very vocal about everything I was going through, everything I was picking up on, all the perceptions and manipulations, and how much I was able to see through it. I was talking about their names, the technologies that I knew that were associated with, and the more I talked, the more there was all this attack started to back. And I realized how targeted I've been, because once those energies started to back off, I became more grounded. I could actually breathe. My heart rate slowed down because I had extremely high blood pressure. I was going to the hospital. I was always, on the verge of a stroke because I was being beamed something constantly, it felt like. And so as I was exposing them, which they did not expect, because, these dreams really, they couldn't predict I was going to have these dreams. These energies started to back off me, and then I was able to leave the X. And then they tried to bring me into their circle and befriend me, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. But one of them actually leaked a lot of information to me and assisted me. But the way I got out of my dreams and just exposing it.
Okay.
A little bit of running for my life, a lot of running from people.
That is kind of like running for your life, considering what you went through in that dream. Can you corroborate any of the other aspects of what Bernie and Andy have talked about tonight, and anything that we haven't mentioned yet tonight?
Well, I mean, just through research and, being in Eisenhower and starting to really deeply understand what his administration involved, alternative and just the establishment of, a lot of military-industrial complex in the beginnings in our country, and all these technologies that have been mentioned over time, particularly from my ex, just some of the information that I was overhearing on the telephone. There's a lot, different hits that I get when I listen to them speak. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. And so, usually when I research, if it doesn't resonate, I just kind of leave it alone. And so a lot of information that I was getting that was resonating, before I really, listened to them, they've been speaking about and articulating in a way that I already feel and know to be true without, that inner meter that usually something's not real or a lie. I mean, that's really how I survived and how I got out of the recruitment because, I've just been a very intuitive being at the Psychic Institute. I grew up, highly intuitive. That is what really enabled me to understand what my mission was, because it had nothing to do with what my family expected of me or the path others wanted for me. It was me finding it myself. And so I've always been sort of laser sharp in being able to see through stuff. And so on top of research, my experience with the X and just inner knowing, everything they say, feels right and goes along what I've come to understand.
Okay, excellent. So let me ask you guys.
Jump on in. Jump in. I know you'd asked us to be responsive to each other's remarks. So let me try this. I think there is a kind of a background in history that is kind of hidden in all this, and it's very, very intriguing. Laura is the great-granddaughter of President Eisenhower. My late father entered the secret realm of the U.S. Defense Technical Community working on the ramjet engine project at Curtiss-Wright from 1952 to 55, which was literally the first 3 years of the Eisenhower administration of the 1950s. It was in that context that he was brought into an awareness of the fact that we were developing high-performance jet aircraft like the ramjet to chase extraterrestrial vehicles out of our atmosphere and the near-Earth environment. President Eisenhower apparently met with extraterrestrials at Edwards Air Force Base in the 50s when he was president, when it was still Muroc Field.
Oh, we lost Laura and Andy.
I'm still here.
Yeah, Bernie's still here. That's interesting. All of a sudden we lose two of our callers, and Laura's audio has been going in and out. I wonder if we're being plagued by any technical problems for a reason. Okay. Well, until I get them back, Bernie, let's see, where were we? I was going to ask you. Go
ahead.
Who was on Mars when you went? You know what? Actually, let me divert, because Andy was just talking about President Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrials, which is something I've wanted to talk with Laura about. But
I'm here.
Oh, I was just mentioning that Andy had mentioned that your great-grandfather had met with extraterrestrials, but I have read that, Bernie, you have actually negotiated with Greys. Is that accurate?
That was one group. There were 3 groups of extraterrestrials that we're negotiating with. I was there at the areas that particular day, and we were discussing with them that we could sit down and talk with them because we had a lot of questions for them. And they said they couldn't do it at that time, but then a few hours later they returned and they said, well, we'll sit down and talk with you. And they began a very intense 3-day negotiation from that time. I actually was there. They had a cot in the back room, which I laid down on from time to time. There was about 40 to 70 people, admirals and generals, and a lot of civilians, a lot of British people were there. And they set up a table and chairs, and they sat behind the table and chairs, and the ship wasn't that far away. So they were going back and forth to their ship. And they began to sit down and discuss who they were, what they wanted from us, and what they were doing here is basically what we discussed. And then from there, an agreement was reached for an exchange program that they would show us more of these domains and more of space. and that they had issues with us going to the moon and to Mars and further out into the galaxy. They didn't want us going any further into the galaxy. They had several concerns, mainly that they used the word contamination. They felt we were contaminated, that we shouldn't have this technology at all. They didn't understand exactly how we developed it, and that we had proceeded a lot further technologically than they ever perceived we could do, and that we were biologically inferior, that if we were to go to certain places, that we would contaminate the area and cause an epidemic. So they didn't want us going there. But eventually, that was, they brought us to an understanding with that question, and that we eventually agreed that we would go there under their guidance, and that's how the project continued from that point on. Like I said, I was there at least 36 hours of negotiation with a lot of people going back and forth asking questions, and then after that we all took a rest. I think it was at Camp David for a while, and then we were waiting for all the reports to come in and then summarize them as to what the next best course of action should be.
Okay.
Tim, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I also hear that Mr. Stillings are you on Q2?
No, I have to, as a personal courtesy, I have to complete what I was saying when I was arbitrarily cut off.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, what happened there?
Yeah, because this is critical. Let me explain before Brett jumps in. What I was saying was we had my dad's entry into the defense technical community following the July 1952 overflight of our nation's capital by 9 UFOs clocked at 7,000 miles per hour at Langley Air Force Base. That was the reason for the origination of these high-performance, initially jet aircraft projects, and things that even evolved into teleportation and the jump rooms. We have the involvement of Laura's great-grandfather as president meeting extraterrestrials in the 50s. This is what I was saying when something intervened and cut me off your show, which is
you and Laura at the same time.
Yeah, very interesting. I was making the point that Richard Milhouse Nixon was President Dwight David Eisenhower's vice president, and it was Richard Nixon who initiated Project Pegasus in the late 60s, early 70s when he became president, and it was Richard M. Nixon who brought a young Navy enlisted man who had done some extraordinary things interacting with extraterrestrials, namely our friend and colleague Bernard Mendez, into the extraterrestrial project. And then we find Bernie and I interacting, and Brett, as Brett can describe, interacting with extraterrestrials during the jump room experience. So I just wanted to kind of paint some of that background because the Eisenhower-Nixon connection is critical because it interlinks these different programs in relation to responding to the extraterrestrial presence.
So, I mean, that's really kind of amazing that it stayed that secret for that long. Now,
if I may interject,
please do.
Nixon was a vice president under Eisenhower, so he knew a great deal about the ET. He became very involved, especially after Eisenhower got elected, in this whole ET affair, and he reported back to Eisenhower directly, or they began setting up like the MAGIC programs and a bunch of other programs, a bunch of other administrations. So Eisenhower was a great leader, a great organizer, and he began organizing a lot of programs and administrative controls on this whole broad-based ET program, which became very, very big. Go ahead.
Laura, did you have something that you wanted to drop in there?
Oh, I'm overwhelmed just because it's my family, and it's just, with Julie and David, my aunt and uncle, who are Eisenhower, Nixon, it's like, here's a president and vice president, and here's, my aunt and uncle married, and I just had a moment. But, what's interesting is being born into this family, knowing, just how the, ET agendas and, the roots, which I'm learning about where they come from, and how, I really came in with a lot of information about Sophia and kind of how to handle the multidimensional nature of our reality and the different levels of beings that we're dealing with from the perspective of, connecting to these energies outside of the physical domain in order to assist us. Because on a human level, we're dealing with something so much larger than what we as humans can comprehend, that it just really dawns on me why I chose this family to incarnate into. as Eisenhower met with the Venusians in the 1960s with Nixon, they really spoke of a promising future that, in a sense, makes up for the treaty that was signed or renewed and the danger that it put us in. We don't hear a whole lot about that encounter, but that's sort of where I show up. My path is very much a part of the Venus energy and what the beings from Venus shared. I don't need to go into that, but I guess my whole reaction was based on handling these beings and what we have to connect with in order to assist our humanity in overcoming some of the limitations of these agreements and treaties.
Okay.
Because I remember as a kid, I said, I know exactly what needs to be done. I just need a voice. And I just remember, and there's many of us like that. All of us, here right now, we know what we're here to do, and our path has been about uncovering that, and it's always been really obvious and clear to me since I was a kid that that I'm here for a specific reason, and so I just have a lot more to share about how we can protect the Ascension timeline. Because the roots of some of this is to steer us into an artificial one that we need to watch.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I actually, before we finish up tonight, I do want to talk about how this all fits into now. But before we get there, I wanted to hit back. I want to get back to Bernie and talk just a little bit more about this meeting. Because it's rare. I don't get opportunities to talk to people who have talked to extraterrestrials very often. And so I want to know, how did they communicate with you guys? Was it telepathic?
There were telepathic issues brought up prior to this meeting where people would talk to them, become telepathic for a period of time. So they were told not to use telepathy on us. And then they agreed, when they figured out what we were talking about, not to be telepathic, and they agreed to learn English. And we agreed to teach them English and teach them about our society and our way of life. And that's one of the things that came out of that meeting. Some of them knew English, some of them knew very little English.
So they would speak with their mouths?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well,
that was a trip.
What you just said was exactly what we told them. Speak with your mouth. Make your mouth move. Make gestures with our hands to our lips and move our lips up and down with our hands, and then they would kind of get a sense of what we were talking about, and then eventually they understood what we were trying to say, because they're very superior beings. They're very strong mentally, and then they eventually figured out what we were trying to say, and then eventually they started speaking all the time, and then eventually they stopped getting telepathic with everyone. But they can become telepathic.
Well, I would understand that that's probably their primary method of communication. So I was curious how exactly they would communicate with you guys. And I've never heard of Greys talking, so that's a new one on me.
There was 3 different types of aliens, but one of them was Greys. And they have on the ships, they have a very elaborate communication system. They do talk, but they talk at a pitch like a dog whistle. It's at a very high frequency. And then they can hear a lot better than we can. They can hear and not the ranges of a dog whistle and above.
I see.
They can hear an owl frequency too, but basically with their elaborate PA system, they're on like a dog whistle, and sometimes they yell and scream just like we do. But basically that's how they communicate.
Okay.
Tim, and I might jump in here that the children in Project Pegasus were also trained for ET human liaison. So, for example, one of the hidden summers that I spent in New Mexico, after teleporting there, spending the summer in project activities, and then teleporting not just back to New Jersey at the end of the summer in New Mexico, but arriving back in New Jersey on the afternoon of the day we had originally left. Okay, the morning of the day we left. Basically, just hiding all of that secret defense technical activity in a time loop that was then closed and basically just evanesced, pulling into.
So you would basically exist in 2 places at the same time. You would be in Arizona and New Jersey
Well, New Mexico, yeah, essentially, if you could stand outside of the quantum hologram and see how that artificial time loop was created, opened up and then closed. But I spent, that was the summer of 73 that my father and I jumped to from the fall of 71. We were staying in a rental house in White Rock, New Mexico, near the Los Alamos labs. And every morning we were being, I and a few of the other children who had been placed in different houses in the neighborhood there in White Rock were taking a van up to a secret lab that's under the girls' gym at the Los Alamos Public High School. And there we were being trained in two forms of communication with the extraterrestrials. Basically, a pictographic alphabet that NASA had derived called a START, and also they were working with our telepathic capabilities. So, it's interesting when I meet Bernie is that he was roughly 10 years older, and my cadre, I don't think, ever progressed officially into ET human communication, or at least our ET communication was more centered around contact experiences we were having, whereas Bernie was one of those individuals who had literally been tasked by the administration to be a sort of a liaison to the extraterrestrials. We had some of that. I had one meeting with two extraterrestrials in New Mexico that summer. But it's just interesting that my point here is that younger people were being trained to later step up and become the next generation of diplomats to some of these extraterrestrial civilizations that were visiting our planet.
That's what Andy said is correct. There was a lot of training going on, and this whole thing jumping back and forth in New Jersey, we called it a differential. It was never fully explained at the time why there was such a time lag, and this whole idea of training and telepathy. What he says about that START program, I was trained in hand gestures, which I did quite well. It's like speaking to a deaf person with your hands, and then eventually they understood that, and then I was very good at this. Eventually, I could handle their telepathy. Not too many people could, so it was a rare commodity at the time. And eventually, I was tasked with going to the different areas and communicating with them and trying to get them not to be telepathic with us. And eventually, it took a long time for this to get around to the different areas with the different space alien groups at the time. And eventually it did, and eventually it worked, and eventually they agreed to speak English, and they were trained in English. We gave them books. I read them books from time to time. And eventually they came around and began speaking English. They didn't want to speak English in the beginning. They said we should learn their language. I said, we couldn't possibly do this because of your telepathic abilities. And eventually they agreed to learn English and speak to us in English only.
That's amazing. No, I'm glad that Laura brought up the shift, you guys, because I'm very curious. One of the reasons that we started this show to begin with was to talk about the possibility of something happening, a big change in the world this year. So with all the experiences you've had, and Andy, I know that you've done a lot of work with time as well, time travel, both to the past and to the future. At least I'm under the understanding that that's what you felt you were doing. Those experiences
we were time traveling,
I just predicated that because I know that I think Bernie, don't you have a different idea of what exactly was going on there? Didn't you say something to the effect of it's impossible to time travel, or at least to the past?
What you're talking about is the different jump areas, either the Lincoln jump or this other areas that we jump to, and there's some kind of, and Andy puts it really good, some kind of quantum pseudo environment, like a hologram, where, because I jumped repeatedly to one of these places, and it was slightly different each time I jumped. And the Lincoln one, I went to the actual Ford's Theater and measured everything out and spoke to some experts about it. For instance, like the original theater had lights, footlights that were gas lights along the front of the stage, which shield the people sitting in the audience, and the exact dimensions of the stage and the exact dimensions of the booths, how far the booths are from the stage and the back areas. There would be a fire brigade there in case of fire all the time at the ready with buckets of water or buckets of sand, and then some other particular items, and I did manage to break a piece of the wood off. It wasn't wood, it was plastic, which I brought back. And then I actually went across the stage, jumped onto the balcony, through the booths, and I noticed the curtains that were there. They were like canvas curtains. And I actually walked outside, and I'm very good at this. It was pitch black. I walked out, say like 15 steps, whatever, made a right, 10 steps, and then came back. It was pitch black. There was nothing in the area around this particular location. And then I came back through the booths, jumped back onto the stage, did this very fast. And then I actually took a tape measure with me. I was measuring everything as I went along. And then jumped back and determined that this environment and this piece of wood was actually a piece of plastic, and that it was some kind of pseudo-reality that someone had created for some reason, unknown to us. But this was a major event. The Lincoln assassination. Forbes Theater was a major gathering area, and it was never determined why they had built this. But apparently, as the years rolled on, the negotiations proceeded. This was some kind of training area for them. Now, why they put the structure thing, I don't know.
So your view is that while Andy is convinced that he was traveling in time, you're thinking that maybe he was traveling to a synthetic environment that was created to study an event.
That's correct. Okay. Somehow they made a recording of this event. They built a pseudo-reality, and they interacted with it from time to time.
Yeah, let me address this.
Go ahead, and
it's actually more. Well. It's more of a dichotomous issue. Really, the standing issue in physics is what is the significance of the second law of thermodynamics, right? The entropy principle. The notion that the past, for example, can't exist because the universe tends towards maximum randomness or chaos, namely entropy of matter and of energy. So the question is, for example, let's say I was accessing via chronovision the Lincoln assassination. Was that the actual assassination that still existed in with some linearity to our present timeline, just like a spool of feature film tape? Or was that a solid-state system that some higher intelligence had created where that event was stored in the present holographically and could be re-accessed as a form of like fourth-dimensional cinema? Okay, Bernie's position is that Enrico Fermi concluded that you can't visit the past because it no longer exists, and you can't visit the future because it hasn't happened yet. But to that I say, well, yes, some of these past environments, for example, seem to have possibly been what I call these synthetic quantum environments, but we were moving around in time when we were simply teleporting between New Jersey and New Mexico. And the New Jersey I was visiting, with all of the hallmarks of reality, and then the New Jersey that I grew up in that I was returning to via teleportation, we were moving around in time on an hourly, a daily, a weekly, a monthly, a seasonal basis. I mean, I spent 3 hidden summers in New Mexico and a good part of the summer of 1970 as well. So they're really different issues. One is, can you move around in time? The answer is yes. The second issue is when you're visiting, for example, a past event, and every time you visit it, it changes a little bit. Is that the actual past that connects to us on a linear basis?
Okay, or Andy, I hate to cut you off here, but we've got like 10 seconds left in the show. I'm hoping that Blog Talk will let us keep going. I hate to interject and interrupt you because this is important material. But quick before we go, I wanted to ask all of you guys, based on your experiences, do your experiences indicate that there's something going on here in this year? What can we expect?
My experiences showed in one chronovision probe 2013 that there was going to be a catastrophic event that would inundate the East Coast of the United States to the point where the U.S. Supreme Court building would be under 100 feet of water. Do I believe that that has to happen in this timeline? No. I don't think the people of this timeline deserve a catastrophe. And so I think just on cosmological principles and cosmic principles, it's not going to happen. I think that the Mayan calendar was a calendar that was a device that was subject to interpretation And the same kind of fear that's been generated about a catastrophic event this year is similar to the kind of apprehensions that were felt around Y2K. And so I think ultimately we might look back at 2012 as Y2K plus 12. I don't think we have to have a catastrophe this year, and I don't think we should anticipate one. We should anticipate not that we're confronted by the beginning of the end, but by the beginning of the future. Okay.
And did you... Yeah, go ahead, Bernie.
I was going to say, I think Fermi came closer to the point. I think these future events are part of some sort of scenario of future events that these great creatures, this advanced civilization, constructed to play out an event and see what type of scenarios would be possible. And this whole Mayan calendar, or the end of an age, or what is now termed the second age of an enlightenment, has arrived, and that these areas that we claim to be future events that are happening, some are like future events, or some scenario of a future event that would play out, or different aspects of a future event. So it's like going to a simulator where you would train and then interact and see what possibilities there were for a future event. Now, how they do this, we don't know. But it's very sophisticated, and the consensus of opinion is that it's possible that these great creatures actually constructed some sort of scenario for a future event that gets played out and different events could occur. They test whether or not, say the United States had a massive earthquake and it was flooded, or there was a meteor strike, or there was a plague, or some other catastrophe, the sun flaring up and causing severe drought. That sort of thing is being played out.
But it sounds to me as this is speculative, not based on testimony. We think this is one thing that may be happening here, correct?
That's correct. It's kind of like speculating on the future.
So, Laura, you have mentioned meetings between your great-grandfather and Venusians, and that they had kind of a different idea of what was possible, what was coming. Can you tell us what their view is?
Well, I mean, we're dealing with multiple timelines, some artificial, and the possibility of having souls siphoned into artificial timelines is very probable, and it's actually what's happening, and that's what, clones, can be used for, along with other purposes for their agendas. But, there's also the organic Ascension timeline, and this is what I work to empower and to steer people towards, because this is something that can't be destroyed, but people can certainly, align their power with the wrong forces and find themselves, in this artificial matrix that is based on a lot of great alien technology. So what the Venetians seem to share, and obviously I wasn't there, so I don't have proof, is, more about the possibility of having our freedom back, where we can come and go from the physical world as we choose, and that there's going to be a lot of intervention, and that no matter how insurmountable the obstacles seem, that there will be higher races that will come and assist us, and also just our unity consciousness and everything that the Venus energy represents. And this is what I find so interesting, because we're dealing with a Mars agenda, and then we're dealing with, Venus, and my work is really about putting the two together and creating the harmony so that the Mars energy can sort of illuminate itself to higher consciousness. As we know, the Mars energy in all of us, has to do with war, has to do with willfulness. And so my goal is to align the willfulness with divine will, because you can't get rid of anything, but we can certainly work with the energy so that we can take it to the highest level without having to negate anything. And so I'll get into a lot more about the meeting with the Venetians, but as far as what's ahead of us, we do have multiple timelines that we're dealing with, and so it's absolutely crucial that the whistleblowers and all that we're sharing is really taken seriously, because it is unbelievable to have this knowledge, because it is so empowering in these times right now to know what we're up against, because we do have a choice, and the Ascension timeline and disclosing these technologies is the route we want to take. the reason that none of the information was disclosed about the meetings with the Venetians is because the government knew that we wouldn't rely on them anymore. We wouldn't need them anymore. And so I definitely, look forward to sharing more about all of that.
And I look forward to an opportunity to talk with you on that. Unfortunately, we're several minutes over, and I'm hoping against hope that Blog Talk Radio is actually going to record this so I can play it back and upload it to YouTube. We do have some listeners still out there listening in, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to say thank you so much to you guys. This was a quick 90 minutes. There's so much to talk about, and I'm glad that you guys are going out there and doing it. And keep up the good work from the heart of just a regular citizen out here in the world. You guys are really heroes to people like me, all three of you, because of the gusto that it takes to go out there and say these things publicly and in the face of instant disbelief in most cases. And so I applaud you. Thank you very much for being on with us tonight and doing what you do.
Thank you for inviting
so
me.
much.
So I want to tell everybody out there who's listening, you can learn more about this stuff through exouniversity.org. There's testimony from Andy. I believe that, Bernard, you now have testimony that's available through Exo University to talk with Alfred, correct?
That's correct.
And Laura, I know Laura's on that site. Brett Stillings is on that site. So go check out that stuff. Laura's got a website, cosmicgaia2012.com. Go check that out. Andy has a website specifically about all this Mars information. It's projectmars.net. And so I want you guys to go check all that out and fill your heads, because there's so much we haven't talked about. And I really implore listeners to acquaint themselves with this information and readjust their view of our reality accordingly, and then share it. So that's our show. Next week, we've got Dr. Joe Mara. He's returning to the show, bringing his friend, a Chandler named Terry Ippoliti. We're going to let callers ask questions while Terry's in trance. So mark your calendars. Bring us your burning spiritual and 2012 questions. You can reach us at facebook.com/extraordinaryyear. Follow me on Twitter at Tim Bravo. And that's it for us. 162 days before December 21st, 2012. Keep your ear to the ground and hold on tight, kids. It's going to be an extraordinary year. Remember,
do not be afraid.
Namaste. Peace is on the way.